You ever have one of those moments where you think, there's no way this is actually happening? Yeah, that was me, standing on the dock, watching a tow truck reverse toward my boat, while Karen, the self-proclaimed lake authority, shouted instructions like she owned the water itself. It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning, the kind of morning where the lake's surface was smooth as glass. The birds were chirping and the coffee was still hot. I'd just finished checking the motor when I heard screeching tires up the hill. I looked up, and there she was, Karen. Sunglasses, clipboard, and a scowl that could peel paint. "Excuse me," she barked. "You can't leave that boat here. It's not registered to a member." I blinked. "It's my boat," I said, trying not to laugh. "I live here." But she wasn't hearing it. "I checked the records," she snapped. "There's no boat under your name. You're violating lake storage policy." Now, if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, you already know reason doesn't work. Facts don't matter. Once they decide you're the villain, there's no turning back. I showed her my property tag, my address, and even the decal on the side of the hull. But she waved it off like I was showing her a fake ID at a nightclub. Within minutes, she had her phone out, calling a tow company. And here's the thing, this wasn't just some idle threat. She actually convinced a tow truck driver to come out. The guy backed down the ramp, chains ready, like it was an episode of Lake Repo. That's when I realized this was going to get messy. I walked over, calm as ever, and asked the driver a simple question. "Do you have paperwork for this?" He hesitated. "Ma'am said it's HOA property." "Really?" I smiled. "Because the title says otherwise." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." But the look on the driver's face started to change. He wasn't so sure anymore. I could see the gears turning. He knew he was stepping into something legal. And as the sun reflected off the water, I pulled out something that would flip this entire situation upside down. My official registration papers. Karen's smirk faded instantly. And that was just the beginning of what turned into the wildest showdown this lake had ever seen. The moment I held up those registration papers, you could almost feel the air around us shift. The tow driver froze mid-step, staring at the embossed state seal like it was a warning sign. Meanwhile, Karen's lips tightened into a thin line, and that trademark HOA confidence of hers started to crumble. "This doesn't prove anything," she stammered, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. "We have our own lake regulations that override basic registration. Now, I'd heard of some wild HOA rules before, but override basic registration? That was a new one. I crossed my arms and said, "You mean your made-up regulations?" Her face turned a shade of red that could stop traffic. "Excuse me? I'm the acting president of the Lakeside Property Committee, and I have authority to enforce—" I interrupted. "Karen, your authority ends at the shoreline. My boat's registered, titled, and insured under my name. You touch it, that's theft." The tow driver shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am," he said to her, "I can't tow this if it's legally owned." Karen snapped back. "Then I'll call the sheriff. He'll confirm everything." "Perfect," I said, grinning. "Let's call him." She didn't expect that. You could see it in her eyes, the way her bluff backfired right in front of everyone, watching from their porches. Because by now we had an audience. Neighbors had stepped out, coffee mugs in hand, whispering and smirking. One older guy shouted from across the dock, "Hey Karen, maybe check your paperwork this time." The tow driver tried to de-escalate, mumbling about just following orders, before climbing back into his truck to wait it out. But Karen doubled down, flipping through her clipboard, pages like she was about to uncover a secret law that only she knew existed. "Here," she finally exclaimed, jabbing at a line on one of her printouts. "Rule 7C, unauthorized vessels left unattended will be subject to removal." I leaned in to read it. "Karen, it says unregistered vessels, and mine's clearly registered." She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. That's when the sound of tires, crunching gravel caught our attention. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up beside the dock. Karen practically leapt with joy. "Finally," she said, "someone who'll take this seriously." Little did she know, the sheriff wasn't exactly on her side. He stepped out, adjusted his hat, and said, "Morning, folks. Got a report of an illegal tow attempt?" I handed him my papers with a smile. "Not illegal anymore. I stopped it just in time." Karen froze, speechless. The sheriff took my registration papers, giving them a slow, deliberate once-over. He was one of those calm, no-nonsense types, the kind of guy who could silence a whole crowd with just a raised eyebrow. After a few moments, he nodded, then looked up at Karen. "Everything here checks out," he said plainly. "Boats registered, insured, and legally docked." Karen blinked like she hadn't heard him right. "What? No, that can't be correct. The HOA handbook clearly says—" The sheriff cut her off, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, this is state property once you hit the water. HOA rules stop at the shoreline. You don't have authority here. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right excuse. The neighbors watching from nearby boats started whispering again. And I swear, one of them even started filming. But the community regulations, she started, her voice trembling. Don't override state law, the sheriff interrupted again. If you'd gone through with that tow, it could have been considered attempted theft of personal property. Karen's jaw dropped. Theft? I was protecting the community. The sheriff's tone stayed calm, but his words were like steel. From what, exactly? A man using his legally owned boat on a public access lake? That one hit hard. Even the tow driver, who'd been leaning against his truck pretending not to exist, gave me a subtle thumbs up. I shrugged and said, "Told you so." Karen glared at me, but the fire in her eyes had turned to smoke. She started pacing in circles, muttering about ungrateful neighbors, and how nobody respects authority anymore. The sheriff finished filling out a short incident report and handed it to me. "You're all clear," he said, "but I'd recommend keeping a copy of these registration papers on you, in case this happens again." "Trust me," I replied, "I will." Then he turned to Karen, his voice dropping just slightly. "Ma'am, I suggest you avoid taking enforcement into your own hands from now on. You're lucky he was calm about this. Not everyone would be." Karen tried to laugh it off, waving her clipboard like it was a magic wand that could erase what just happened. "Oh, of course, officer. Just a misunderstanding." But nobody was buying it. The crowd was still there, watching every second of her backpedaling. As the sheriff left, Karen stormed off toward her car. But I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to admit defeat easily. And sure enough, I soon found out just how far she'd go to get even. You thought the story ended with Karen walking away quietly. Think again. Because by the next morning, the peace I'd earned on that lake had completely vanished. It started at sunrise. I walked down to the dock, coffee in hand, expecting calm water and an easy day on the boat. But instead, I found a bright orange sticker slapped right across my hull. In huge block letters it read, "Notice of impound, unauthorized vessel." I actually laughed, out loud. She couldn't seriously be trying this again. Then I noticed the fine print. Per Lakeside Property Committee Enforcement. Karen. She had gone full petty mode. I peeled the sticker off, shaking my head, but that was only round one. By noon I got an email from the HOA board. Subject line, violation of Community Code 7C, pending disciplinary review. There it was again, Rule 7C, the same bogus rule she'd tried to use before. Only this time she'd taken it up the chain, trying to make it official. I called the HOA office. The secretary, clearly embarrassed, whispered, Yeah, Karen filed a complaint. Says you docked in the wrong zone and refused to comply." I sighed. "You mean the zone I've been using for 3 years? The one with my assigned slip number?" Silence. Then she said, "Off the record. We all know what she's doing, but the board's required to hold a hearing. A hearing. Over my own boat." At that point, I realized Karen wasn't just trying to make a point. She was trying to humiliate me. She wanted control, and she hated that I'd stood up to her in front of everyone. But here's the thing. I wasn't going down quietly, so I did my homework. I gathered every piece of documentation I could find. Registration, insurance, HOA slip assignment, even old emails approving my docking location. Then I went a step further. I called the county records office. Turns out, the lake property lines showed that half the dock area wasn't even under HOA jurisdiction. By the time I walked into that hearing room a few days later, I was locked and loaded with proof. Karen sat at the table, arms crossed, smirking like she'd already won. She started off with a speech about rules, order, and respect for community standards. The board members nodded politely, but I could tell they'd heard this song before. When it was my turn to speak, I dropped the county maps on the table. "Karen," I said, "you tried to tow a boat you don't even have authority over. You're not protecting the community. You're overstepping it." And that's when the real tables turned. The room went dead silent as those county maps hit the table. You could practically hear the paper slap echo off the walls. Karen froze mid-eye roll, her confidence deflating like a popped inner tube. I slid the documents toward the board members, pointing at the red boundary lines. "This here," I said, "shows exactly where the HOA's jurisdiction ends. You see this shaded area?" I tapped the map for emphasis. "That's the portion of the lake and dock space owned by the county." Meaning, I looked right at Karen. "Your so-called authority doesn't apply here." The board president adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. "You're saying this area isn't under HOA control at all?" "That's correct," I replied. "It's publicly accessible water with privately owned slips. And my slip, number 17, is registered under my name and address." You could see realization dawn across the faces of the entire board. Meanwhile, Karen sat stiffly in her chair, clutching her clipboard like it might save her. She tried one last time. That can't be accurate, she said, her voice trembling. We've always enforced lake rules in that area. Tradition doesn't make it legal, I said calmly. And trying to tow my boat from an area you don't even govern? That's harassment. The board president sighed heavily. Karen, this is a serious overreach. The sheriff already confirmed this boat's legal status. You escalated the matter without proper authority. Karen's face turned scarlet. I was just trying to keep order. If people start ignoring the rules, what's next? Chaos. Another board member muttered under his breath. You already caused that. Laughter rippled. Through the small crowd in the back, several neighbors had come to watch, phones out, waiting for the drama to unfold. The president cleared his throat and said firmly, effective immediately, the complaint is dismissed. And Karen, I'm removing you as acting president of the Lakeside Property Committee. Until further notice. You could have knocked her over with a feather. Her mouth dropped open in total disbelief. You're removing me? After everything I've done for this community? The president nodded. Yes. Because you nearly caused a lawsuit over a boat you had no claim to. For the first time since this all started, Karen didn't have a comeback. She grabbed her clipboard, muttered something about ungrateful neighbors, and stormed out of the room. When I stepped outside afterward, the sun was bright over the lake again. My boat sat right where it belonged, floating peacefully, free of stickers, chains, or drama. A few neighbors clapped as I passed. One shouted, "Hey! Captain One-Up strikes again." I laughed, shook my head, and said, all it took was a little paperwork, and a lot of patience. Because when someone tries to take what's yours, the truth is the strongest anchor you've got.